This is my great aunt's bracelet, and it's a watch and a bracelet. It's convertible. Her husband bought this for her sometime, I think, in the 1930s during the Depression.
Okay.
Money was not a problem for them.
Well, they were some of the fortunate ones
They were
during
very
that specific time in history. You've got this fantastic Art Deco watch.
This bracelet is actually an Art Deco lady's wristwatch, purchased sometime during the 1930s when the United States was still struggling through the Great Depression. At a time when millions of families were fighting simply to get by, there was still a small group of wealthy households whose lives remained largely untouched by the economic crisis. They continued to commission fine jewelry, collect luxury timepieces, and embrace the latest European fashions. This watch was born in that very world. Its design captures everything that made the Art Deco movement so distinctive. Clean geometry, perfect symmetry, and understated elegance replaced the elaborate floral motifs that had defined the previous generation. The case was crafted from platinum, a precious metal prized not only for its rarity but also for its strength, allowing jewelers to secure small diamonds with remarkable precision while maintaining an exceptionally delicate appearance. Hidden beneath that elegant exterior is a Swiss mechanical movement fitted with 17 jewels, a reliable standard for high-quality ladies' watches of its era. Yet surprisingly, neither the diamonds, the platinum, nor even the movement itself became the feature that fascinated the appraiser the most. Instead, the real story lies in the way its original owner chose to wear it. Rather than using it solely as a wristwatch, she had the piece modified so the watch head could be removed, instantly transforming it into a diamond bracelet. Today, multifunctional accessories are nothing unusual, but in the 1930s this was a remarkably modern concept, reflecting a growing desire for jewelry that could adapt effortlessly to different occasions. Nearly a century later, the watch still preserves much of that original spirit. It remains both a beautifully crafted timepiece and a reminder of an era when watches were becoming expressions of personal style as much as practical instruments. Even so, collecting trends have changed dramatically over time, and precious materials or age alone no longer guarantee exceptional market value.
And a second factor is that everyone's using their cell phones or the smartwatches now. So it's very difficult to find the right audience that appreciates this wonderful vintage timepiece that you have. So that's an Art Deco piece. If this ever came to auction, the watch would have a value of $300 to $500.
Oh, wow.
I brought today a pendant watch that my father gave my mother after they were divorced. It's kind of an apology item because they had a rough several years, like probably 40 plus years, where they couldn't find any area to communicate on. And they started communicating later in life, probably in their late 60s, early 70s, and they started calling each other and visiting, and they'd go out to coffee, things like that. They went on trips together. And my mom turned to me during that time and she said, "Your dad's my best friend." Well, he gave it to her kind of as a way to say he was sorry for things that had happened over the years. When I look at this, I think it's all about forgiveness.
From the very first moments of the story, it becomes clear that this family never preserved the watch because they believed it was valuable. To them, it represented something far more personal, a long overdue apology after more than 40 years of a marriage that had already come to an end. That is why, when the pendant was placed on the appraisal table, the experts found themselves drawn not only to its emotional history, but to the remarkable object itself. This is a pendant watch, a style of jewelry that was especially popular among European and American women during the early decades of the 20th century. Before wristwatches became the standard, these miniature timepieces were worn on long chains, serving as both practical instruments and elegant accessories. This example still captures that tradition beautifully. The chain and case are crafted from platinum and set with diamonds, while the blue sapphire winding crowns are details more commonly associated with high-end watches of the period. But everything visible on the outside was only the beginning. Once the case was opened, the appraisers discovered a movement made by Blancpain, the Swiss watchmaker founded in 1735 and widely recognized as the oldest watch manufacturer in the world, still operating today. For nearly 3 centuries, Blancpain has built its reputation on traditional craftsmanship rather than mass production, and the presence of its movement immediately elevated the significance of the piece. The next surprise appeared on the back of the watch. Instead of a plain metal surface, it featured a hand-painted enamel miniature. Creating enamel of this quality required finely ground glass, carefully mixed pigments, and repeated firings at extremely high temperatures. Even the smallest mistake during the process could ruin the entire work. Nearly a century later, the enamel remains remarkably well preserved, making it one of the details collectors appreciate the most. Perhaps because it was treasured as a family keepsake rather than an investment, the watch has retained nearly everything serious collectors hope to find. And that was exactly the moment when the experts arrived at a valuation no one in the family had expected.
Retail on this, it would bring about $5,000 to $6,000.
Holy smokes. That's a lot more than I thought.
It's a little treasure.
It was sitting in a box, and now I'm gonna wear it. I love it.
This is the classic playing with your dad's watch as a kid before you know what watches are watch. This is the one that was always around the house. I remember it used to be so much bigger in your hands when you held it. It was like, it's massive. My dad had a very interesting career in that he came from very humble origins in Malaysia, and he became a corporate executive. And when he retired, he opened a farm. He retired to do hard labor, and he was never happy in his life. Because he opened a farm, he stopped wearing the watch. I remember asking him, hey, whatever happened to that Rolex? And he's like, oh yeah, it's just in the back. So he gave it to me, and he told me he bought it in Hong Kong.
From the very beginning, it becomes clear that this Rolex was never preserved simply because it was a Rolex. To Ronnie, it had always been his father's watch, the one he used to play with long before he understood what mechanical watches were or why people treasured them. Years later, after his father had stopped wearing it and life had taken an entirely different direction, the watch quietly found its way back into his hands, carrying far more than time. This particular Rolex came from a period when the company itself was evolving. In earlier decades, Rolex had built its reputation on rugged tool watches designed for divers, pilots, and explorers. By the early 1980s, however, the brand was increasingly appealing to businessmen, executives, and professionals who wanted a watch that reflected years of hard-earned success as much as everyday reliability. Two-tone Datejust models quickly became symbols of that new era. In many ways, Ronnie's father lived that same story. He grew up in humble circumstances in Malaysia, worked his way up to become a corporate executive, and later chose to leave that world behind to start a farm. As tailored suits gave way to a quieter life in the countryside, the Rolex disappeared into the back of a drawer, no longer needed but never discarded. For many years, two-tone Rolex watches like this one stood in the shadow of their stainless steel counterparts, which collectors generally favored. But collecting trends rarely stay the same. As early steel sports models became increasingly scarce, enthusiasts began looking again at references that had once been overlooked, recognizing them as important pieces of Rolex history in their own right. This watch is neither a rare edition nor an unusual configuration, yet it has retained the originality collectors value most. More importantly, it spent its entire life with one man, silently accompanying the defining chapter of his journey before becoming part of his son's memories. Perhaps that is why, even before the valuation was revealed, this Rolex had already become priceless in a way no market could fully measure.
So, value-wise, if you had to go buy that watch that year, today, $5,000.
Whoa, that's huge. How much will my dad have spent on this?
He dropped the grand on it for sure.
That's crazy. Thanks, Kevin. Thanks for sharing my dad's memories.
What did you bring in today?
I have 2 clocks. Both of them I got from my father's shop. He was a watchmaker in Manhattan. And when he died, these were some of the things that were never picked up. Silly people. And it is an alarm clock, and so is this one actually. I've had that one appraised before for about $400.
Mechanical alarm clocks like these were once an essential part of everyday life, long before smartphones and digital clocks changed the way people kept track of time. But in the world of collecting, their value is not simply determined by whether they still function. The details that truly matter are the craftsmanship, materials, originality, and the small pieces of history each clock has managed to preserve. The first example is known as a cottage clock, a style of household clock that became especially popular during the late 19th century. These clocks were commonly displayed on shelves, tables, or mantels, becoming familiar objects inside Victorian-era homes. Powered by a mechanical spring movement, they were designed to run reliably after being wound by hand. But what makes this particular example interesting is found in the details surrounding the mechanism. The case is made from rosewood, a material admired at the time for its rich color, durability, and natural grain. On the front is a decorative glass panel created using a technique known as reverse painted glass. Instead of painting on the visible surface, the artist had to apply the design from behind the glass, building the image in reverse order. It required precision and patience, and after more than a century, many similar clocks have lost these original decorative elements. The second clock represents a very different moment in history. As railway travel and longer journeys became increasingly common, people began looking for timepieces they could take with them. Travel alarm clocks were created for that changing world, small enough to fit into luggage, but reliable enough to keep running away from home. Placed side by side, the two clocks reveal how people's relationship with time evolved. One belonged to an era when the clock stayed at the center of the home. The other reflected a faster-moving world where people wanted to carry time with them wherever they went. Still, for collectors, age alone is never enough. Original materials, the condition of the movement, and the survival of delicate details are often what separate an ordinary old clock from something truly collectible.
There are a number of these, and this is one of the harder models to find, and as a result, very collectible. This clock would have been probably made about 1885, 1890, 1900.
Okay.
And I would say today, conservatively, it still has that $450 value, which is great because most clocks have gone down and are starting to creep back up again. This is still in that price range.
Nifty.
Well, I brought in a clock, and it was in my great aunt's home as far along as I can remember, and I don't know a whole lot about it.
This is called a novelty clock. It was made by the Oswald company, German company. They made several different forms of novelty clocks with carved wooden cases.
Novelty clocks were created with a very different purpose from traditional timepieces. They were not designed simply to measure time. They were also decorative objects meant to bring personality, creativity, and a sense of fun into everyday spaces. Instead of the formal wooden cases commonly seen on many household clocks, manufacturers began experimenting with animals, characters, and unusual designs that could immediately catch someone's attention. Oswald Company became especially known for this style of carved wooden clock. Their creations often transformed ordinary clocks into playful figures, including owls, Scotty dogs, and many other imaginative forms. Many of these pieces eventually reached the American market, where buyers were drawn to objects that combined practical function with a unique decorative appearance. But what made this particular clock unusual was something even the experts could not immediately answer. The carved figure had certain features that resembled a dog, yet other details looked closer to a fox. Instead of making it less interesting, that uncertainty became one of the reasons the piece stood out. In the collecting world, mystery can sometimes be just as important as beauty. Common models usually have auction records, reference examples, and a clear history that experts can compare. But when a design almost never appears anywhere else, it begins to attract the attention of collectors searching for something they may never encounter again. Another fascinating detail is the way the clock tells time. Rather than using traditional hour and minute hands, the character's eyes rotate to display the time. It is a simple idea, but it perfectly captures the spirit behind novelty clocks, turning an everyday object into something memorable every time someone looks at it. For pieces like this, value does not come from a complicated mechanism or expensive materials. What matters most is rarity, originality, and whether the object tells a story that very few others can.
This one, I talked it over with my colleagues. We felt that if the stars were all in alignment, in a good clock auction, maybe you have a couple of collectors that really wanted it, we felt that it could easily bring $1,000 to $1,200.
Wow, amazing. Who would have thought the old dog was, wow.
This is a Seamaster watch, an Omega, that my stepfather owned for years and willed it to me. I love it and wear it all the time. I don't know anything about the watch at all.
Well, what this watch really is a chronograph, and it resets and you can time things with this. A watch like this...
What makes this Omega special is not only the Seamaster name printed on the dial, Hidden behind the appearance of a classic wristwatch is one of the most fascinating and complex mechanisms in the world of mechanical watches, the chronograph. Unlike a standard watch that only displays the time, a chronograph contains a separate timing system built into the movement. This means dozens of tiny components, including gears, springs, and levers, must work together with incredible precision. Before digital technology became common, these mechanical instruments played an important role in sports, engineering, aviation, and many other fields where accurate time measurement was essential. But one of the details that helps reveal the era of this Omega can actually be seen from the outside. The two round pushers on the side of the case are a characteristic of post-war chronographs, a period when Swiss watchmakers began improving their designs to make watches more durable and practical for everyday use. Another important feature is the 1/4-carat yellow gold case. While many people associate luxury Swiss watches with 1/8-carat gold, 1/4-carat versions have their own special connection to the American market. For decades, companies like Omega produce specific models designed to match the preferences and requirements of customers in the United States, making these watches an interesting chapter in the brand's history. For collectors, the true value of a vintage chronograph comes from more than just the material of the case or the name on the dial. It is the combination of the movement, originality, condition, and the historical moment the watch represents. Small details that many people might overlook, from the shape of the pushers to the construction of the mechanism inside, can reveal an important period when Swiss watchmaking was evolving. These watches were no longer just tools created to measure time. They were becoming designs that combined precision, durability, and craftsmanship in a way that collectors continue to appreciate decades later. And after years of being worn simply as an everyday watch, this Seamaster was finally about to be seen from a completely different perspective.
A watch like this in 14 karat, probably from the mid-50s, in an auction would bring about $3,500.
Holy smoke. You're kidding me.
No, I'm not kidding
I
about
may quit
this.
wearing it.
No, you gotta wear it and enjoy it. On the retail level, fixed up, restored. It's quite expensive to restore a chronograph.
Oh, really?
It's
Okay.
expensive process. But when you do, it probably bring about $5,000.
Oh, wow.
We found this clock in Prague last summer at an antique shop, and we fell in love with it, just had to have it. We paid, I think, around $3,000.
When you brought it to my table this morning, I immediately recognized it for a real special clock for a couple of different reasons.
Buying an antique does not always begin with years of research or collecting experience. Sometimes the first thing that draws someone toward an object is simply the feeling that there is something unusual about it. But in the world of antiques, what appears on the surface is often only the beginning of a much deeper story. One of the first things that caught the experts' attention was not just the design, but the name behind the clock, Lenzkirch. During the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Lenzkirch was considered one of Germany's most respected clock manufacturers. Based in the Black Forest region, an area famous for its long tradition of clockmaking, the company became known for precise movements, excellent craftsmanship, and attention to even the smallest details. But what makes this clock stand out is also the way it brings together different design influences in one piece. The flowing curves across the body reflect the spirit of Art Nouveau, an artistic movement inspired by nature and organic shapes at the end of the 19th century. At the same time, some of the stronger geometric elements seem to point toward Art Deco, the style that would become much more influential in the decades that followed. That combination makes the clock feel like a transition point between two different periods of design history. To most people, it may simply look like a beautiful table clock. But to collectors, those small details reveal the time, style, and artistic environment in which the piece was created. Beyond the appearance, the quality of construction is just as important. From the metal case to the enamel dial and carefully finished hands, each element reflects the standards expected from higher quality clocks of that era. And in this case, the biggest question was not whether they had discovered something that had been completely overlooked. They had already paid a significant amount when they bought it. The real question was whether their first instinct inside that antique shop in Prague had led them to something truly special.
Well, in my opinion, it's an extra special clock. My colleague and I conferred on its value, and at retail we would put it at $3,800.
All right, that's great. That's good news.
Very good.
It actually belongs to my husband, but you know, Texas is a community property state, so I figure it's mine too. After having had his first Rolex bought off his wrist when we were living in South America, he went to the PX in Panama, we're retired military, and bought this. He bought it in 1966, and he was en route to Vietnam for the first tour. So it has endured a helicopter crash because he was with the first of the 9th of the 1st Cav Division. It went through another tour in Vietnam, and then he came home and was having a little brawl with our son, a fun time, dropped the watch, broke it, so I had to have it repaired.
What makes this Rolex special is not only the places it has been, but the exact model that happened to be on its owner's wrist. This is a Rolex GMT-Master reference 1675, one of the most recognizable and celebrated sports watches ever created by Rolex. The GMT-Master was introduced in the 1950s, during a period when commercial aviation was entering a completely new era. As pilots began flying longer international routes, they needed a practical way to keep track of multiple time zones at the same time. With its additional GMT hand and rotating 24-hour bezel, the watch allowed them to read both local time and another time zone from a single dial. But in the world of vintage Rolex collecting, the smallest details can completely change how a watch is viewed. One of the most famous features is the red and blue bezel, known among collectors as the Pepsi bezel. Beyond its iconic appearance, the two colors originally served a practical purpose, helping users distinguish between daytime and nighttime hours when reading the GMT function. Even more importantly, this watch comes from an early period of the reference 1675 and features pointed crown guards. These sharper, slimmer guards around the winding crown were only produced for a limited time before Rolex moved to a thicker and more rounded design. Today, that small difference is exactly the kind of detail vintage collectors pay close attention to. However, with vintage watches, rarity is only one part of the story. Originality can sometimes matter even more. The details that many owners once considered old or worn, such as a faded bezel, an aged dial, or original hands, are often the exact things collectors want preserved. They are proof of the watch's history, and once replaced, they can never truly be recreated. That is one of the biggest surprises in the vintage watch world. Sometimes the thing that affects value the most is not decades of wear, scratches, or the life a watch has experienced. It can be a repair that was done with the simple intention of making the watch better.
So I'm going to start off with this watch at auction is worth $8,000 to $10,000.
Okay, good.
Good, right?
Big return on his investment.
Big return. Okay,
good.
Here's the rest of the story. If it had all been original, $15,000 to $20,000.
Oh, my word.
My father is a retired doctor, had many years practiced in Manhattan, and has had a great love for watches and clocks for all his life. He used to occasionally go to a pawn shop to see what was available, and he picked this up at a pawn shop on 3rd Avenue.
Do you know when he bought this watch?
My best guess is about 30 years ago. I think it's an aviator watch.
The first thing that makes this Longines stand out is something anyone can notice immediately: its unusually large size. But this was never designed just to make the watch look impressive. Every part of its appearance came from a very specific purpose. This is a Longines aviator, a type of watch created during a period when flying was still one of the most demanding challenges in the world. Long before GPS and modern navigation systems existed, pilots had to rely on maps, compasses, time calculations, and mechanical instruments to determine their position in the sky. That is why aviation watches were built very differently from ordinary wristwatches. The dial had to be large enough to read quickly inside a cockpit. The numbers needed to be clear with strong contrast, and every functional detail had to be practical in difficult flying conditions. Longines aviation watches are also closely connected to the legacy of Charles Lindbergh, the pilot who completed the first solo non-stop flight across the Atlantic Ocean in 1927. From his own experience navigating long-distance flights, Lindbergh understood that knowing an aircraft's exact position was one of the biggest challenges pilots faced. That need helped inspire the development of specialized watches designed specifically for aviation. For collectors, the appeal of a watch like this is not based on precious materials or luxury decoration. Its importance comes from the fact that it was a real tool, created for an era when every long-distance flight still involved uncertainty, skill, and risk. Over the decades, many examples disappeared, or modified, or had original parts replaced. Because of that, finding one that still represents this important chapter in aviation history has become increasingly difficult. And perhaps the most interesting part is where this watch was discovered. It did not come from a famous aviation collection or a museum archive. It was simply found by someone who loved watches, sitting inside an ordinary pawn shop long before its historical significance was fully recognized.
Actually, I do. He paid no more than $100.
$100, 30 years ago?
30 years ago.
Okay. A watch like this on the retail market today probably would run around $12,000. It's a pretty rare watch. There aren't many of them around. And this is, yeah, one of the first ones I've seen in the last 5 or 10 years.
I brought in a collection. It's my dad's. He's 86, and he's collected watches for maybe 30 some years. He always wore a nice watch, like a Rolex, something like that. His health is failing, so he started liquidating things, and we were going through his office and found a cardboard box and opened it up, and these watches were in there. We really don't know anything about them. Recognized the Cartier and the Rolex brands, but the other ones we did not. So we thought it would be nice to get an appraisal.
The most fascinating thing about this little box was that the most recognizable names were not necessarily the most important pieces inside. For many people, Rolex and Cartier are often the first brands that come to mind when talking about luxury watches. They are famous names recognized around the world. But in the world of mechanical watch collecting, there are other makers that may not appear as often in everyday conversations, yet represent some of the highest levels of Swiss watchmaking. That was why the experts quickly focused on the Patek Philippe watches in the collection. For generations, Patek Philippe has been known for its dedication to traditional craftsmanship, extremely high finishing standards, and production numbers far smaller than many mainstream luxury brands. One of the examples in this collection was a golden ellipse, a model introduced in the late 1960s with a case shape inspired by the golden ratio, a concept found throughout art and architecture. But the cardboard box still had more surprises waiting inside. Alongside them were watches from Audemars Piguet, another name highly respected among collectors for its complicated mechanical movements and exceptional craftsmanship. The brand is especially known for ultra-thin watchmaking, where creating a movement that is incredibly slim while still remaining accurate and reliable becomes one of the greatest technical challenges in traditional horology. Then there was Blancpain, a manufacturer closely connected with classic mechanical watchmaking and complications such as calendar displays and moonphases. These details are not only practical functions, they also reveal the skill required to design and assemble such a complicated mechanism inside a small wristwatch. When all of these pieces were placed together, the collection no longer looked like a random group of watches collected over the years. Each one represented a different side of Swiss watchmaking history: hand finishing, mechanical innovation, iconic design, and the legacy of some of the industry's most respected manufacturers. And perhaps the biggest surprise was that all of this history had been sitting quietly together inside an ordinary cardboard box for years, waiting for the family to discover what kind of collection their father had carefully built over more than 3 decades.
As a group of watches in that little cardboard box that you brought in at retail, you've got somewhere between $46,000 to $57,000 worth of watches there.
Oh my goodness. We'd gone to Europe in 1958 to visit places that my father had known when he was a child. And we were shopping in Geneva in Switzerland, and we saw this watch in the window of a watch shop. We all admired it, and then we left. And my father secretly went back and bought the watch and gave it to my mother for Christmas. It was a nice surprise, and we all recognized it. We all said, "Oh, that beautiful watch."
Some Rolex watches were created to travel deep beneath the ocean or follow pilots across different time zones. But there is another side of Rolex history that many people rarely see: watches designed not to look like instruments, but to disappear into the world of fine jewelry. And that is exactly what makes this piece so fascinating. Unlike the familiar image of models such as the Submariner, Daytona, or GMT-Master, Rolex also created elegant jewelry watches for women during the 1950s and 1960s, especially for the European market. These were not watches built around professional features or extreme durability. They represented a completely different philosophy, where Swiss watchmaking was combined with precious materials, craftsmanship, and the elegance of high-end jewelry. At first glance, many people would probably never realize this was a watch at all. It looked more like a gold and diamond bracelet, and that was completely intentional. Rolex designed the small mechanical movement to be hidden inside the piece, allowing the watch to blend naturally into the bracelet. When closed, the focus was not on the dial or the mechanism, but on the beauty of the jewelry itself. But the closer the experts examined it, the more the details revealed its true quality. The entire bracelet was crafted from 1/8 karat gold, with carefully finished decorative elements that made it an essential part of the design rather than simply something holding the watch in place. It showed a moment in Rolex history when the company was not only focused on precision timekeeping, but also on creating pieces that required the skill of a jeweler. The diamonds followed the same idea. They were not just added as decoration. They were selected to complete the appearance of a luxury bracelet watch and match the standard expected from a piece like this. That is why Rolex jewelry watches from this period surprise many collectors today. They represent a chapter of the brand that is very different from the tool watches most people know. More than 60 years later, the Christmas gift secretly purchased in Geneva was no longer just a beautiful family memory. It had become a piece that preserved the craftsmanship, design, and a lesser-known era of Rolex history.
In 2022, in the retail market, this watch would probably be priced somewhere between $12,000 and $15,000.
Wow, I thought it would be $1,000, something like that. I don't buy jewelry.
Each link's $1,000.
Wow.
This is a Rolex Day-Date model. I bought it in 1964. It became known later as the presidential model when Lyndon Baines Johnson got one as a gift, and his was the 18-karat gold plate.
And where did you buy it?
I bought it in Hong Kong. I had been drafted into the Army, and I was in Korea. During the tour of duty in Korea, you got a 1-week R&R, either Tokyo or Hong Kong. My wife at the time and I met in Hong Kong, and she bought this for me as my birthday present.
A Rolex Day-Date has always held a special place in the history of the brand. But what makes this particular watch stand out is not only the famous president name, it is the combination of small details that somehow survived with it for decades. Introduced in 1956, the Day-Date became the first wristwatch to display both the full day of the week and the date on the dial. Over time, the model became associated with world leaders, executives, and influential figures, helping create the nickname that collectors still use today, the Rolex President. But in the world of vintage Rolex collecting, not every Day-Date is viewed the same way. One of the details that immediately caught the experts' attention was the 1/8 karat white gold case. While many buyers during that period preferred the more recognizable look of yellow gold, white gold versions were produced in much smaller numbers. That difference made them a more unusual variation for collectors searching for vintage Day-Date models. Then there was another important detail hidden in plain sight. The dial itself was a Blancpain dial, a signature feature of early Day-Date watches with slightly sloped outer edges that created a unique sense of depth. To most people, it might seem like a small design choice, but for Rolex collectors, details like this can reveal the period, originality, and desirability of a watch. However, the biggest surprise was not only the watch itself, it was everything that stayed with it. The original box, catalog, timing papers, hang tags, and small accessories had all been preserved for more than half a century. For many owners, these items would have simply been packaging and easily thrown away. But for collectors, they help complete the story of the watch from the moment it originally left the store. A Rolex can be serviced, repaired, and maintained over time, but once original documents and accessories disappear, they are almost impossible to replace. That is why a complete set carries such importance in the vintage watch world. It does not just add extra items beside the watch, it preserves its history. And after all these years, this birthday gift purchased in Hong Kong still carried almost everything that came with it from the very beginning.
That's right. In today's market, because it's a whole complete set, and the watch is in such great condition. A retail price on this is going to be $20,000.
Oh, my. Well, it kept up with the times. I'm glad to hear that. Wonderful. Thank you. It's great. Good news.
Today I brought for you a Patek Philippe watch that was, we believe, purchased by my great-great-grandfather. And according to family lore, he opened a drinks booth at the Chicago World's Fair and made all his money. He moved to Los Angeles in the late 1890s and became an oil and land guy. We recently just found it in my mom's safety deposit box.
But what the family did not realize was that this small watch, hidden away for so many years, was valuable for reasons far beyond its age or the story that had been passed down through generations. Because the moment experts saw the name Patek Philippe, they immediately knew they were looking at something from one of the most important watchmakers in the history of Swiss craftsmanship. Since the 19th century, Patek Philippe has built its reputation in a very different way from many other manufacturers. The company was never focused on producing the largest number of watches. Instead, it became known for limited production, extraordinary finishing, complicated mechanisms, and a level of craftsmanship that made its pieces desirable among some of the world's most selective collectors. For many owners, a Patek Philippe was never just a device for measuring hours and minutes. It was a symbol of achievement, taste, and the ability to own something created with exceptional attention to detail. But the most fascinating part of this particular watch was not only the famous name engraved inside, it was the artwork on the outside. This was an enamel pendant watch, and that single detail completely changed how collectors would look at it. Unlike a simple decoration added onto a case, traditional enamel work required a long and delicate process. The artist had to use finely ground colored glass, carefully apply it in thin layers, and then fire the piece at extremely high temperatures until the enamel fused with the metal surface. And this process was incredibly unforgiving. One small mistake with the temperature, the timing, or the materials could damage the entire image and destroy hours of work. That difficulty is exactly why these watches are so admired today. They are not only examples of mechanical engineering, they are miniature pieces of art created by combining two completely different skills, the precision of a watchmaker and the eye of an artist. And there was still one more detail that made this piece even more complete. After more than 100 years, the original gold chain was still with the watch. For many antique watches, those accessories are usually the first things to disappear. They are replaced, separated, sold, or simply lost as the piece moves through different generations. So, when a watch survives with its original components and details that help confirm its history, collectors see something much more meaningful. They see a piece with provenance. And in the world of high-end collecting, that can be the difference between owning an old object and owning a piece of history.
If you were to walk into a jeweler or a watch shop today, you'd be expected to pay $20,000 to $25,000 for this watch at retail.
Excellent. Good to know.
It was one that my father had that he left me when he passed away. It must have been his or his grandfather's. I really don't know a lot about it.
Was your grandfather in the Navy?
No, my grandfather was on the railroad, and I don't know about the Navy.
It's made by one of the finest watch companies in the world, Patek Philippe.
But behind the simple appearance of this watch was a completely different side of Patek Philippe that many people never associate with the brand. When most people hear the name Patek Philippe, they usually imagine luxury watches created for collectors, with precious metals, complicated movements, and elegant designs. But there was a time when Patek Philippe was not only creating symbols of luxury, they were also producing highly precise instruments built for accuracy. And when a watch was designed for maritime use, accuracy was not just an impressive feature. It was absolutely essential. Before GPS and modern electronic navigation systems existed, ships depended on astronomy, charts, and precise timekeeping to determine their position at sea. Even a difference of just a few seconds could create a much larger error after days of travel. That meant marine chronometers had to meet standards far beyond ordinary watches. And that was one reason Patek Philippe became one of the names trusted for this kind of precision. Inside this watch was the Caliber 21, a movement designed with a focus on stability and accuracy. Small details, from the ruby jewels to the gears and regulating system, were carefully finished to reduce friction and help the mechanism perform consistently over time. But for collectors today, the movement alone is only part of the story. What makes military-related watches like this so fascinating is the combination of craftsmanship and real-world purpose. Unlike many Patek Philippe pieces that were purchased as luxury items or preserved in private collections, watches created for service use were designed to function under real conditions. They had to be accurate, they had to be reliable, and they had to perform in situations where a normal dress watch was never expected to go. That is why surviving examples in excellent condition have become increasingly difficult to find more than a century later. For collectors, this is not just an old Patek Philippe. It represents a period when mechanical watchmaking was not only about beauty and prestige, but also about creating instruments that played an important role in real journeys across the world.
So do you have any idea? Have you thought of the value of the watch?
I've never really thought of it. It's been in the drawer, and that was it.
Well,
until I came here.
Okay. Well, you'll probably be in for a pleasant surprise. On the retail level in 2023, a watch of this condition and quality would bring somewhere in the $25,000 to $30,000 price range.
Oh my gosh.
Well, it belonged to my great-grandfather, and it came down through the family.
Now, this is a watch made for the Chinese market. And there was an entire industry in Switzerland centered in the town of Fleurier, which produced, in the early part of the 19th century, watches that were sold exclusively to a Chinese market. Typically, they have this wonderful floral enamel on the back, but yours is more special than that. Now, we can turn this over and look at the other side of the watch. When we first saw the floral enamel, you saw the pearls around the outside of it. This once had pearls around it too, and I understand this has had sort of a sad history.
That's correct. It was confiscated by the communists during the Cultural Revolution, and when it was returned, the pearls were gone.
How did you get it back after the Cultural Revolution?
It was returned to my family, and it came down through my mother.
But the most surprising part of this watch is that even after losing part of its original decoration, what remained inside was far more important than the missing pearls, because this was not just another Swiss pocket watch. It was an Automaton watch. And at the time it was created, this represented one of the most complicated and luxurious forms of watchmaking that craftsmen could produce. Unlike ordinary watches that were only designed to tell time, an automaton contained an additional mechanical system hidden inside the case, allowing small figures or decorative elements on the watch to actually move. And all of this happened without electricity, batteries, or modern technology. Every motion depended entirely on tiny gears, springs, and precisely engineered components working together. Even creating a simple movement required an extraordinary level of skill. That is why antique automaton watches have become some of the most fascinating pieces for collectors. But there was another layer that made this example even more special. It was made in Fleurier, one of Switzerland's important watchmaking centers during the 18th and 19th centuries. The workshops there became known for producing highly decorated luxury watches, especially pieces created for the Chinese market, where wealthy collectors admired elaborate Western mechanical creations. These watches were not only expected to be accurate, they had to amaze people. Swiss craftsmen combined complicated mechanical movements with colorful enamel work, precious materials, pearls, and animated scenes, transforming a small timepiece into something closer to a miniature piece of art. And that is why the loss of the original pearls did not erase the true importance of this watch. The automaton mechanism remained, the craftsmanship remained, and the history behind it remained. For collectors, a piece like this represents much more than traditional Swiss watchmaking. It captures a period when craftsmen were pushing mechanical art to its limits, creating tiny machines that could surprise people purely through movement and engineering. After more than 2 centuries, and after surviving such a difficult journey, the fact that this watch still existed at all was already something remarkable.
We think that if you had to insure it, you should think in terms of $35,000, perhaps to $40,000. It's quite a nice watch, and you should be very happy that it survived, and I'm delighted to hear the story of the watch.
Thank you.
Well, I inherited it from my grandfather. He had worn it When I was a little child, all the time that I knew him, he wore this watch. And it intrigued me just because of the moon phases, I think. When he passed, I inherited it. I took it in to a repair shop because part of it wasn't working. They indicated that it really wasn't worth fixing and that a new face had been put on it.
But what that repair shop did not realize was that this was not just another old Rolex. Hidden behind that small dial was one of the rarest and most unusual chapters in Rolex history. Today, most people associate Rolex with legendary sports watches like the Submariner, GMT-Master, or Daytona. But before those models became global icons, Rolex briefly explored a completely different direction, creating complicated watches that focused more on traditional watchmaking craftsmanship. And the moonphase calendar was one of the most fascinating examples. This watch did much more than simply tell time. It combined a calendar display showing the date, day, and month with a moonphase complication that followed the cycle of the moon. This type of feature is usually associated with traditional high-end watchmakers, where the value comes not only from accuracy but from the mechanical artistry hidden inside. But what makes this Rolex even more interesting is how short its production period was. After only a limited time, Rolex shifted its focus toward tool watches designed for divers, pilots, explorers, and people working in demanding environments. That decision helped create the Rolex identity known around the world today. But it also made watches like the moonphase calendar incredibly uncommon. For vintage Rolex collectors, the smallest details can completely change the story. The case, serial numbers, dial condition, and originality are all examined carefully because each piece helps prove how much of the watch's history has survived. And that is where this example became complicated. Because in the vintage watch world, making something look newer does not always make it more valuable. An original dial with natural aging can sometimes be far more desirable than one that has been restored to look perfect. The fading, the small changes, and the marks left behind by decades of use are often exactly what collectors are searching for. They are proof of the watch's original journey. So even though this moonphase remained an extremely rare Rolex, the changes made in the past created a major difference that only serious collectors would truly understand.
This watch, I think easily today at auction, would be $35,000 to $45,000 in the condition it's in.
That's a big surprise. Well, that's great.
I haven't seen a Rolex moonphase in the 10 years I've been filming Antiques Roadshow walk-in, so it was nice that you brought one in. I've been waiting for one, and you brought it in, so I appreciate that. If it had a very strong dial, this watch could be $1 million.
This was my grandfather's watch. He was in the Navy. I'm not exactly sure how he came about owning it. I know it's a Rolex.
Okay.
Other than that, I don't really know anything.
The watch is a Rolex GMT. It's called a pointed crown guard, which means that the guard that holds the crown comes to a point.
But what his grandson did not realize was that some of the details that made this watch look old were actually the same details that made it so special. Because in the world of vintage Rolex collecting, newer does not always mean better. In fact, sometimes the marks left behind by time are exactly what collectors spend years searching for. This Rolex GMT-Master belongs to a generation that has become highly desirable, not just because of the name on the dial, but because of the small characteristics that survived after decades of use. One of the first things collectors look for is originality. Over the years, many older Rolex watches were sent in for servicing, and during those services, parts that looked worn, faded, or outdated were often replaced with newer versions. For an everyday owner, that made perfect sense. The watch came back looking cleaner and newer. But decades later, collectors started looking at those original parts very differently. The faded bezel that many people might think needs replacing can actually become one of the most attractive features of the watch. Over time, sunlight, age, and natural wear can slowly transform the original colors, creating what collectors often call a ghost bezel. Each one ages differently, meaning no two examples look exactly the same. And the same idea applies to the dial. Certain vintage Rolex dials can naturally change color after many years, developing warm brown tones that collectors call a tropical dial. The surprising part is that these changes were never intentionally created by Rolex. They happen naturally. They cannot simply be manufactured again. They are the result of decades passing over one specific watch. That is why vintage collectors often value preservation more than perfection. A flawless-looking replacement part may appear newer, but it removes part of the watch's original history. The scratches, fading, and aging that once seemed like imperfections can become proof that the watch has remained true to its original journey. And that is what made this GMT-Master so fascinating. It was not valuable because it looked untouched by time. It was valuable because so much of that time was still visible.
The retail value of a watch in this condition would be in the $40,000 to $45,000 price range.
Kidding me? You guys really like to go for the shock value, don't you? That's crazy. I'm going to be very careful about where it goes when we get home.
This is my husband's grandfather's watch. It was a watch that we actually found while cleaning out a home after his aunt passed away about 2 years ago. My husband's grandfather served in World War I. After the war, he stayed in Europe and toured a little while, and we think that's when he purchased it, possibly in France.
But what the family did not know was that this small watch came from one of the most important turning points in watchmaking history. At the beginning of the 20th century, a wristwatch was not yet the everyday object we know today. For generations, pocket watches had been the standard choice for men. They were considered reliable, traditional, and the proper way to carry time. Wristwatches, on the other hand, were still seen by many as smaller accessories rather than serious timekeeping instruments. But then history changed everything. World War I transformed the way people thought about watches. On the battlefield, reaching into a pocket to check the time was no longer practical. Soldiers needed something faster, something they could read instantly while keeping their hands free. And that simple need helped push the wristwatch into a completely new era. This Patek Philippe was created during that fascinating period of transition. But what caught the experts' attention was not just its age, it was what had survived. Because in the world of vintage watches, value is not always about looking brand new. Sometimes the most important question is how much of the original watch is still there. And this example had something collectors always hope to find. Originality. The dial itself tells part of that story. It represents an early generation of luminous watch dials, a major innovation at the time because it allowed the owner to read the time more easily in low-light conditions. But the real surprise was how much of the watch's original character remained intact. Over the decades, many watches from this period were restored, repainted, polished, or had parts replaced to make them look newer. For an everyday owner, that might sound like an improvement. But for collectors, every replaced detail can remove a piece of the watch's original history. This Patek Philippe avoided that fate. The dial, the finishing, and the small details from the period all help preserve the story of when the watch was first made. It was no longer just an old gold wristwatch. It was a piece from the moment Patek Philippe and the entire watch industry were entering a new chapter, when wristwatches began replacing pocket watches and shaping the future of modern watchmaking.
A watch in this condition, which is really rare, probably in today's market would be about a $40,000 to $50,000 watch retail.
Okay.
And very collectible and very desirable.
Okay. Awesome. Awesome. Yep. I think there may be a fight to the finish on who's going to wear it next.
It was a gift from my father. My father grew up in Greenwich, Connecticut. It was given to him from a neighbor. His neighbor was a civil engineer, and his neighbor also ran a radio repair shop in his basement, and my dad helped him repair radios. And he actually told me that this man inspired him to go on to MIT, and so it's really special.
But what the family did not know was that hidden inside this meaningful gift was one of the most complicated mechanisms ever created in the history of mechanical watchmaking. At first glance, it might appear to be a beautiful antique gold pocket watch. But once experts looked closer, they realized it came from Smith & Son London, a respected English watchmaker known for producing highly accurate timepieces during the late 19th and early 20th centuries. However, the true value of this watch was not only found in the name engraved on it. The real secret was inside the movement. One of the first details revealing the quality of the watch was its power reserve indicator, a feature that allowed the owner to see how much energy remained before the watch needed to be wound again. At the time this piece was made, that kind of function represented an impressive level of engineering. But that was only the beginning. The detail that placed this watch into an entirely different category was the tourbillon. In a traditional mechanical watch, gravity can affect the tiny moving parts inside the mechanism and create small variations in accuracy over time. The tourbillon was designed to solve that problem by placing key components of the regulating system inside a rotating cage. The idea may sound simple, but creating it was incredibly difficult. Every wheel, pivot, and tiny component had to be manufactured with extreme precision for the entire mechanism to work correctly. Even today, the tourbillon remains one of the most respected symbols of high-end watchmaking. And that's what makes this pocket watch so different. Collectors are not only looking at the gold case or the fact that it has survived for more than a century, they are looking at the mechanical achievement hidden inside. A small object that fits in the palm of a hand, yet contains hundreds of carefully engineered parts working together for one purpose, measuring time with extraordinary precision. More than just a family keepsake, this watch represents an era when the greatest watchmakers were pushing mechanical craftsmanship to its absolute limit.
This watch in the present market would retail between $40,000 to $50,000.
Oh my gosh, you're kidding.
No.
Wow. I had no idea. I better be careful with it.
This tourbillon escapement is still rare today, and it's made for very collectible watches. Let's take an example of like a Patek Philippe wristwatch. A strap, Patek Philippe, 18 karat gold. Retail price, let's say, is around $20,000. That same watch with a tourbillon escapement would retail by Patek Philippe between $200,000 and $250,000.
Oh, wow.
So it's something really wonderful to have and very special.
That's amazing. Well, I knew it was a special watch, but I didn't know how special.